was a cold. The wind howled outside, making the old house creak and groan. Emma sat alone in the living room, wrapped in a thick blanket. The fireplace crackled, and shadows danced on the walls. She glanced at her phone. It was just past midnight. Emma had agreed to house sit for her aunt while she was away. The house was in the countryside, far from neighbors or the noise of the city. During the day, it was peaceful, but at night, the isolation felt different, unnerving. The house was old, with floors that creaked even when no one was walking on them. Emma told herself it was just the house settling, but tonight the sounds felt louder, closer, almost intentional. She decided to distract herself by reading a book. Picking up a novel from the coffee table, she settled into the couch. As she turned the pages, her mind wandered. She thought about the stories her aunt had told her about the house's history, stories she had laughed off during the day. The house, her aunt had said, was over 100 years old. Some said it was haunted. Emma didn't believe in ghosts, but now, alone in the dark, her aunt's words replayed in her mind. A sudden knock on the window broke her thoughts. Emma froze, her heart pounding. The window faced the garden, and no one should have been out there. She stared at the glass, her breath caught in her throat. After a few moments, she convinced herself it was the wind. "It's nothing," she whispered, her voice shaky. She returned to her book, but her eyes kept darting to the window. Minutes passed, and the house seemed quieter than before, too quiet. Even the wind had stopped. Emma's ears strained for any sound. Then she heard it. A faint tapping, this time coming from the front door. She hadn't mentioned expecting. Slowly, Emma got up, clutching the blanket around her like armor. She walked to the door and peeked through the peephole. There was no one there. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, but she didn't open it. Instead, she locked the door and stepped back, her pulse racing. The tapping stopped, but as she turned to go back to the living room, a soft creak came from the hallway behind her. Emma spun around, staring into the dark corridor. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the empty hallway. But as she moved closer, she noticed something odd. A faint trail of muddy footprints on the wooden floor. Emma's stomach dropped. She hadn't been outside, and the doors had been locked. Her breathing quickened. "No way," she muttered, shaking her head. She wasn't about to investigate. Emma backed away, keeping her eyes on the door. Suddenly, the basement door creaked open wider, and a low, guttural sound echoed up the stairs. Emma bolted. She ran to the living room, grabbed her keys, and headed for the front door. Just as she reached it, she heard heavy footsteps behind her. She didn't look back. Her hands fumbled with the lock, and she yanked the door open, stepping into the cold night air. Emma ran to her car, but when she reached it, she realized she had left her phone inside. She cursed under her breath, looking back at the house. The windows were dark, but she thought she saw movement in one of them, a shadow passing by. "Nope, not going back," she whispered. She closed the car and locked the doors. Her hands trembled as she started the engine. The headlights illuminated the driveway and the edge of the woods. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing among the trees, watching her. Emma didn't wait to find out. She sped down the gravel road, leaving the house behind. Her heart didn't stop racing until she was miles away. The next morning, Emma returned with the police. They searched the house but found no sign of anyone. The muddy footprints were gone, and the basement door was locked. Emma moved out of the city after that. She never went back to her aunt's house, and she never told anyone the full story. But sometimes, late at night, she swore she could still hear the sound of footsteps in the hallway. For days after the incident, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Even in her small apartment in the city, the fear lingered. drenched sweat, heart pounding, convinced she'd heard the faint tapping sound that had haunted her at the house. One evening, her aunt called. "Emma, I just got home," her aunt said, her voice tense. "Did something happen while you were here?" The police mentioned a call about trespassers. Emma hesitated. How could she explain what had happened without sounding crazy? Finally, she told her aunt everything: the knocks, the footprints, and the strange shadow she saw before fleeing. Her aunt was silent for a long time. Then she sighed. "I was hoping this wouldn't happen," she said softly. "What do you mean?" Emma asked. "They told you house," her aunt admitted. "I didn't think it would matter. I thought it was all in the past, but maybe not." Emma gripped the phone tightly. "What is it?" Her aunt explained that years ago, the house had belonged to a reclusive man named Mr. Harris. He was strange and rarely seen in town. Rumors spread that he was involved in dark rituals, that he'd tried to summon something, though no one knew what. When he vanished one night, the house sat abandoned for years before Emma's aunt bought it. "There were incidents when I first moved in," her aunt said hesitantly. "Strange noises, objects moving on their own. But it stopped after a while. I thought whatever it was had passed." Emma's chest tightened. "And now it's back?" "Maybe, or maybe it never really left," her aunt replied. "I'll look into it. You just take care of yourself." But Emma couldn't just leave it at that. She needed answers. Over days, Emma dove into researching the house's history. She visited the local library, poring over old newspapers and records. What she found made her blood run cold. In 1924, a young woman named Clara Lindsley had gone missing from a neighboring farm. Search parties combed the area but found no trace of her, until 6 months later, when her body was discovered in the woods near the house. The papers described her death as mysterious and unsettling, though they didn't elaborate. There was another incident in 1979. A teenage boy dared his friends to spend the night in the house, which was abandoned at the time. When morning came, he was gone. His friends claimed they heard him screaming, but they were too afraid to investigate. His body was never found. Emma's hands shook as she read the accounts. Each time the house seemed connected, though there was never enough evidence to prove anything. Then she found an article about Mr. Harris, the house's previous owner. The report mentioned strange symbols found etched into the walls of the basement, though authorities dismissed them as the work of vandals. Emma thought back to the basement door creaking open and shuddered. Against her better judgment, Emma decided to return to the house. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe she felt she had to face whatever was there. Her aunt agreed to meet her there during the day. When Emma left, the house looked the same, calm, unthreatening in the sunlight. "I've been hearing noises again," her aunt admitted as they walked inside, just like before. They stood together in the living room. Emma's eyes were drawn to the basement door. "I want to see the basement," she said. Her aunt frowned. "Are you sure?" Emma nodded. They opened the door together. A cool, musty air wafted up, carrying a faint metallic smell. They descended the stairs slowly, their footsteps echoing. The basement was dark, lit only by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were damp, and the floor was cracked concrete. Emma scanned the room, her stomach tightening. "There," she whispered, pointing. In the far corner, faint etchings marked the wall. The symbols were jagged and uneven, forming an intricate pattern that made Emma's head throb just looking at it. Her aunt's face paled. "I thought I painted over those years ago," her aunt murmured. As they stood there, a sudden chill filled the room. Emma felt a presence, something heavy and suffocating. Her aunt grabbed her arm. "We need to leave," she said urgently. But as they turned to head up the stairs, the light bulb flickered and went out. The basement plunged into darkness. Emma fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight. The top had swung shut. A low guttural growl echoed through the basement. Emma froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Her aunt nodded, her face pale. The growl came again, louder this time. The sound seemed to reverberate through the walls. Then Emma saw it, a pair of glowing red eyes staring at them from the darkness. Her aunt screamed, and Emma grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the stairs. The door was locked, and they pounded on it desperately. "Help!" Emma shouted, though she knew no one was around. Behind them, the growl grew louder, accompanied by a scraping sound like claws on concrete. Emma turned, her flashlight sweeping across the room. For a brief moment, she saw a shadowy figure, tall, gaunt, with unnaturally long limbs. Then the figure lunged. Emma didn't know how they got out. The next thing she remembered, she and her aunt were outside, gasping for air, the midday sun beating down on their faces. They didn't speak as they got in the car and drove away. That night, Emma dreamed of the symbols in the basement. She saw them glowing, pulsing, as the shadowy figure loomed over her. When she woke up, her body felt heavy, as though something was pressing down on her. Her aunt moved out of the house soon after. It was put up for sale, but no one bought it. Over the years, Emma heard whispers, stories of strange lights in the windows, screams in the night. She never returned. Quiet moments before sleep, she felt as though she wasn't alone. The faint tapping on her bedroom wall reminded her that some places and some things are never truly left behind. Years passed, but Emma's experience at the house remained fresh in her memory. Every knock on a door, every creak in a floorboard brought her back to that basement. Sleep became a luxury. Nightmares haunted her, vivid and relentless. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night, convinced she could hear the growling noise, the same low, guttural sound that had chased her out of the house. Her aunt never spoke about the incident again, but Emma sensed her avoidance was deliberate. The house was eventually sold to a real estate investor, someone who cared little about its history, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't entirely free of whatever was in that house. One evening, Emma received an unexpected letter. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible, and the envelope had no return address. When she opened it, the words inside made her stomach drop. "The symbols have meaning. The shadow knows your name. It's waiting." Emma dropped the letter and backed away, her chest tightening. Who had sent it? How did they know what had happened? Despite her fear, Emma felt drawn to the house, as if something was calling her back. She wanted to ignore the pull, but her curiosity and her growing sense of unease won out. This time, Emma wasn't going alone. She reached out to her friend Alex, who had always been fascinated by paranormal phenomena. When Emma explained what had happened, Alex was more excited than scared. "This is huge," Alex said, packing equipment into a bag. "If we can document this, it might explain everything." Emma wasn't sure she wanted an explanation. She just wanted closure. When they arrived, the house looked the same, eerily unchanged, as if frozen in time. The yard was overgrown, and the air felt heavier, colder, as they approached the front door. "Are you ready?" Alex asked, holding a camera in one hand and a flashlight in the other. Emma nodded, though her hands were trembling. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and decay. Dust coated the furniture, and cobwebs hung in the corners of the ceilings. Emma's footsteps echoed as she led Alex to the basement door. "This is where it happened," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex set up a camera on a tripod and turned on a small recorder. The two descended into the basement together, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The symbols were still there, etched deeply into the walls, but now they seemed more prominent, as if they had been freshly carved. Emma stared at the symbols, her stomach churning. "What do you think they mean?" she asked. Alex squinted at them. "They're not random. They look like some kind of sigil, maybe protective, but more likely summoning." "Summoning what?" Emma asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Something powerful or dangerous." As they explored further, the temperature dropped sharply. Emma's breath fogged in the cold air, and she hugged herself for warmth. Then the growling started again. It was louder this time, more menacing, as if whatever was making the noise was closer. Emma and Alex froze, their flashlights shaking as they searched the room for the source. "What the hell is that?" Alex whispered, his voice trembling. Before Emma could answer, the growl turned into a deep, guttural voice that echoed through the basement. It spoke in a language neither of them understood, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. Then they saw it. The shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its glowing red eyes fixed on them. It was taller than Emma remembered, its limbs impossibly long, its presence overwhelming. Alex stumbled backward, dropping the camera. "We need to leave, now," but the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. The figure moved closer, its steps slow and deliberate. The symbols on the wall began to glow, pulsing with a sickly red light. Emma's heart raced as she backed into the corner. "What do you want?" she screamed, her voice cracking. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a shadowy hand and pointed at Emma. Alex from his bag a small vial of salt and threw it at the figure. The salt seemed to burn it, and the shadow recoiled with an inhuman scream. "Run!" Alex shouted, grabbing Emma's arm. They bolted up the stairs, slamming into the door until it burst open. The house seemed alive now, groaning and shaking as if it wanted to trap them inside. Outside, the air felt lighter, though the sense of dread lingered. Emma and Alex didn't stop running until they were safely in the car. They sat in silence for a moment, catching their breath. "Did you see its eyes?" Alex finally asked. Emma nodded, her hand still shaking. "It was waiting for me. It knew I'd come back." That night, Emma dreamed again. This time, the shadow spoke to her, its voice low and commanding. "You cannot run forever. You belong to the house now." She woke up gasping, the weight of the dream pressing on her chest. When she checked her phone, there was a new message. It was from an unknown number, and it contained only one word: soon. Emma knew then that the house hadn't let her go. Whatever was in the basement had marked her, and no matter where she went, it would always be there, waiting. After the incident at the house, Emma struggled to return to a normal life. Even during the day, she felt as though something was watching her, lingering just out of sight. At night, her dreams became increasingly vivid, filled with the shadow's glowing red eyes and that terrible growling voice. Alex tried to reassure her. "We weakened it. That salt worked, didn't it? Maybe it's not as strong as it seems." But Emma wasn't convinced. The entity didn't feel weaker, it felt patient. Then strange things began to happen in her apartment. At first, they were small, a flicker of lights, objects misplaced, strange smells. But over time, the occurrences grew. The air in her home would turn icy cold, and she'd hear faint whispers coming from the walls. No matter how high she turned up the heat or how loud she played the TV, the whispers remained, always just beneath the surface. One night, Emma woke up to find scratches on her bedroom wall. They formed the same symbols she had seen in the basement. She screamed, but no one answered. Desperate, Emma decided to contact someone who might understand what she was dealing with. Alex suggested a paranormal investigator named Dr. Catherine Royce, who had a reputation for dealing with extreme cases. Dr. Royce was an older woman, calm and confident. When Emma described the events, Royce listened carefully, nodding occasionally. "This isn't just a haunting," she said finally. "What you're describing sounds more like a parasitic entity, something that feeds on fear and attaches itself to specific individuals." Emma shuddered. "It's attached to me?" Dr. Royce nodded grimly. "The encounter at the house likely created a bond. Whatever it is, it's drawn to you. Breaking that bond won't be easy." The investigator outlined a plan, a cleansing ritual combined with Emma confronting the entity in its strongest space, the old house. "It wants you to fear it," Dr. Royce explained. "Fear gives it power, but if you face it and reject it, you might weaken its hold." Emma, Alex, and Dr. Royce spent the next few days preparing. They gathered protective items, salt, iron, candles, and talismans, and researched the sigils from the house. Dr. Royce discovered that the symbols were tied to an ancient summoning rite meant to call forth a watcher. A watcher isn't a spirit in the traditional sense, Royce explained. It's more like a sentinel, keeping guard over a cursed space. Someone likely called it to the house years ago, but its purpose has blurred over time. Now, it exists to torment anyone who stumbles into its domain. On the night of the ritual, Emma and her companions returned to the house. The air was heavy with tension, and the wind seemed to carry faint whispers. The group gathered in the living room, surrounding themselves with protective wards. The basement door loomed nearby, its dark gap like a gaping mouth. Dr. Royce lit the candles and began chanting in a low voice, her words resonating with an otherworldly power. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The wind outside howled, and the house seemed to tremble. Then the growling began. It started softly, like a distant rumble, and grew louder with each passing second. The basement door flew open, and the shadowy figure emerged, its red eyes blazing. Emma froze, her body trembling. "It's here," she whispered. Dr. Royce continued chanting, throwing a circle of salt around Emma. "You have to speak to it," Royce urged. "Take back your power." The shadow advanced, its limbs elongating unnaturally. Alex threw a handful of salt at it, and it recoiled with an ear-piercing scream. Emma stepped forward, her legs shaking. "You don't belong here," she shouted, her voice breaking. "You don't control me." The shadow hissed, its form flickering. The glowing symbols on the walls began to pulse faster. "You are nothing," Emma screamed, her anger overtaking her fear. The shadow surged toward her, but as it reached the circle of salt, it stopped, writhing as though in pain. Dr. Royce hurled a small iron talisman at its feet, and the entity let out a deafening roar. The glowing symbols exploded into light, and the shadow dissolved, its scream echoing as it disappeared. When the silence returned, the house felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. Emma collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Royce placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's over," she said softly. They left the house that night, and Emma felt the shift immediately. The oppressive presence was gone, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. Over the following weeks, the nightmares faded, and the strange occurrences in her apartment stopped. The house was eventually demolished, and the land left untouched. But Emma knew she'd never forget the Watcher's eyes or the feeling of its presence in the dark. Though it was gone, she would always carry a piece of its shadow with her, a reminder of the night she stood alone and faced her greatest fear. With the house gone, Emma slowly began rebuilding her life. The sense of fear and dread that had loomed over her for so long began to fade, leaving room for a cautious optimism. She started therapy to deal with the lingering trauma and sought solace in reconnecting with friends and family. Alex checked in often, though their shared experience at the house became an unspoken bond, something neither of them wanted to revisit. Dr. Royce occasionally sent messages, encouraging Emma to focus on the strength she had shown that night. But the greatest change was internal. Emma realized she was no longer the same person who had walked into that house weeks ago. She had confronted her darkest fear and survived, emerging from the ordeal with a newfound resilience. One evening, while unpacking a box of belongings, she came across an old journal she'd forgotten about. Flipping through its pages, she found an entry she had written as a teenager. "One day, I hope I'm brave enough to face the things that scare me, not run from them, but meet them head on, even if it's hard." She smiled faintly, running her fingers over the words. Months later, Emma found herself on a quiet road near where the house had once stood. The lot was overgrown with wildflowers, the remaining traces of the building buried beneath nature's reclaim. She parked her car and got out, standing at the edge of the property. The air felt calm, the whispers gone. For the first time, the land seemed at peace. Emma knelt and placed a small charm, a protective talisman given to her by Dr. Royce, on the ground. "Stay here," she said softly, her voice steady. "Keep it safe." As she stood and turned to leave, she felt an overwhelming sense of release, as though a weight she hadn't fully realized was lifting off her shoulders. In time, the events at the house became memories, sharp and painful, but no longer overwhelming. Emma started painting again, her work reflecting the transformation she had undergone. She painted landscapes of wildflowers reclaiming ruins, of shadows fading into light. Her nightmares became rare, though occasionally she'd wake to the faint echo of the watcher's growl in the back of her mind. Each time, she reminded herself of the truth. It was gone, and she was still here. The experience had left scars, but they were a testament to her survival. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, a beacon of her own light. Emma's journey was far from easy, but she learned that fear doesn't have to define the shadow of the house and the shadow within herself. She discovered her courage, and in the quiet moments of her new life, she knew that while the past would always remain a part of her, it no longer held the power to haunt her. The Watcher was gone, and Emma was free. Ellie's parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving her alone in their new house. At 17, Ellie considered herself independent enough to stay home alone. The house was in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of a small town, surrounded by dense woods. It was bigger than their previous house, and Ellie loved her new spacious room. That Friday evening, she ordered pizza, set up her favorite movie, and settled into the cozy living room. It felt nice to have the house to herself. No nagging parents, no noisy siblings, just peace and quiet. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the house, Ellie noticed how different the place felt at night. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant rustle from the woods seemed amplified. She shrugged it off, convincing herself that it was just her imagination. By 10 p.m., Ellie decided to head upstairs to her bed. As she climbed the stairs, a faint noise caught her attention, a soft tapping sound coming from somewhere upstairs. She froze midway, listening intently. It sounded like it was coming from one of the windows. Tap, tap, tap. Ellie laughed nervously. Probably just the wind, she muttered, though the night was still. She walked to the top of the stairs, determined not to let her nerves get the best of her. In her bedroom, Ellie closed the curtains tightly and locked the windows before crawling into bed with her book. She let the rhythmic sound of the rain, which had just begun to fall, ease her worries. But just as her eyes were starting to droop, there it was again. Tap, tap, tap. Her stomach twisted as the sound grew louder, more deliberate. It wasn't coming from the rain, it was too steady. Someone, or something, was knocking. Ellie mustered her courage and walked cautiously to the window. She peeked through the edge of the curtain but saw nothing. The yard outside was pitch black, the faint light from the street lamp barely reaching the tree line. Probably a branch, she told herself, her voice shaky. She closed the curtain again, her fingers trembling. She was just about to crawl back into bed when the noise started again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, the sound wasn't coming from her bedroom window. It was coming from downstairs. Her heart hammered in her chest. She hesitated, debating whether to investigate or stay put. It's probably nothing, she whispered, trying to calm herself. But the idea of ignoring it made her anxiety worse. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight before slowly creeping down the stairs. When Ellie reached the bottom step, the tapping noise stopped. She shined her flashlight across the living room, her beam sweeping over the furniture. Nothing seemed out of place, but the silence was unsettling. That's when she noticed the sliding glass door leading to the backyard. It was slightly ajar. She frowned, certain she had locked it earlier. Slowly, Ellie approached the door and closed it tightly, twisting the lock with shaking fingers. She scanned the backyard, her flashlight catching nothing but rain-drenched grass and shadowy trees. As she turned back toward the living room, something caught her eye, a faint smudge on the glass door. It was a handprint. Ellie's breath hitched. The print was too large to belong to her or her little brother. Someone had been at the door. A loud clap of thunder shook the house, and the power went out. Darkness swallowed everything, leaving Ellie with only her phone's flashlight. Panic set in as the house grew deathly quiet, except for the steady patter of rain. Ellie ran back upstairs and locked herself in her bedroom. She dialed her parents, but the call went straight to voicemail. Her next thought was to call the police, but she hesitated. What if they thought she was overreacting? Her phone buzzed suddenly, a text message from an unknown number. "Nice house. Do you like being alone?" Ellie dropped the phone, her heart racing. She grabbed it again and called immediately. "What's your emergency?" the operator answered. Ellie's voice was shaky as she explained. "There's someone outside my house, or maybe inside, I'm not sure." The operator assured her that officers were on their way. As Ellie hung up, she heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps in the upstairs hallway. She held her breath, her hands clenching her phone. Someone was inside. The footsteps stopped outside her bedroom door. Ellie backed away, her heart hammering in her chest. She pressed herself against the wall, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Then came the sound of the doorknob turning. Ellie froze. She hadn't locked the door. She cursed herself silently as the door creaked open an inch. "Who's there?" she croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. No response. The door opened wider, but the hallway beyond was too dark to see anything. Suddenly, a figure emerged, a tall, shadowy man with piercing eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. He wore a hood, his face partially obscured. Ellie's legs felt like jelly as the man stepped into her room. He moved slowly, deliberately, as though savoring her fear. "Leave me alone," she screamed, throwing a heavy book at him. It hit his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. As he moved closer, Ellie scrambled onto the bed, her back pressing against the headboard. She grabbed her phone and aimed its flashlight directly at his face. For a brief moment, the light illuminated him fully. His skin was pale, almost unnaturally so, and his lips curled into a cruel smile. Before he could take another step, distant sirens pierced the silence. The man turned his head sharply, his smile vanishing. He moved back toward the door, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as he had appeared. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights filled the windows. Ellie ran downstairs as two officers entered the house, weapons drawn. She told them everything, trembling as she recounted what had happened. They searched the entire house and the surrounding yard, but found no sign of the intruder. The officers assured her they'd patrol the area throughout the night and stay nearby. But Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that the man hadn't truly left. As she tried to calm down, Ellie glanced at her phone. A new message had appeared from the same unknown number. "You were lucky this time, I'll be back." Ellie stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. She knew